Hey guys, so I'm going to be doing a Q&A video today about teaching and moving abroad. All of these questions are questions from people who have commented on my YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or messaged me directly. So I've compiled them all up. I'm going to make one question and answer video, and I've split it up into 3 categories. The first one is preparing to move. The second one is when you're actually there, and the third ones are personal questions that people have asked me. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first question is how to find a job. This includes, job requirements, what do I need in order to apply, where can I actually look for the job, and the hiring process. So we'll start with the requirements, things that you actually need in order to apply for the job. Of course, this is going to vary from country to company and all of that, but just based off my experience, these are the 4 things that I've generally always had to have. The first one is a bachelor's degree. And you don't need a bachelor's degree in teaching or education, it's just any bachelor's degree as long as you have one. The second is a TEFL certificate. Again, as long as you have it. Some companies have asked for 120 hours or above, so I would recommend you getting the 120-hour certification. It's usually the same price as others, so might as well just do that one. You can get them on Groupon. I've seen them for as low as like $20. So super easy and super fast to get the TEFL certificate. The third one is a police background check. You don't necessarily have to have the police background check already completed, but just the ability to pass the police background check, no federal crimes on your record. And the fourth one is a passport from an English-speaking country. These countries include the US, Canada, Ireland, the UK, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Sometimes they make exceptions, and even if you don't have a passport from an English-speaking country, as long as you pass a certain English exam to prove your level, you can also apply for them too. If you have everything that you need in order to apply for the job, now what? Where do you look for a job? So I'm gonna link some of the job boards that I'm talking about down in the description, so you don't have to write them all down. But there are lots of different job boards that I always look on, and it's important to look on all of them because sometimes, of course, jobs are posted on one and not the other, so it's best to look on as many as you can. The job boards that I highly recommend using are Dave's ESL Cafe, ESL Authority, ESL Job Feed, Learn for Good, Teach Away, and Go Overseas. Let's talk about the hiring process. It's pretty similar to any job that you would apply for back home. Typically, you're going to start with an interview, you might possibly have a second interview, and then you're just waiting for the contract to come in and offer you the job. Some companies I've interviewed with have asked me for a demo teach, not all of them. So especially with doing Zoom calls because you're applying abroad, sometimes I've had to do, interactive Zoom lessons where I'm actually teaching on Zoom, like an online lesson. Sometimes I've had to video myself teaching in an actual classroom and send it to them. But I would say overall, I don't usually get asked to do a demo teach when I'm applying from the US to go move abroad. Now we're on to question number 2, which is good agencies or programs to teach through. This one is a little bit difficult for me to answer only because I haven't actually taught through an agency or a specific program, but I have done a lot of research into different programs in different countries just because I was looking into applying to them. Since I'm more familiar with the Asian teaching job market, I'm just going to focus on Japan and South Korea for this question. If you are looking into teaching in Japan, one of the best programs that you can get into is the JET program because it's actually through the government. It takes a really long time to apply and to actually get the job, but once you do, I've heard nothing but great things. And for South Korea, it's a really similar situation. There's 3 programs, EPIC, SMO, and GEPIC. They're all 3 also through the government. Again, takes a really long time to do the hiring process, but once you get in, it's a really good job. And of course, there's always volunteer type opportunities with companies like the Peace Corps. I have a friend who was just teaching English with the Peace Corps in Africa, and she absolutely loved it. The only thing that might make it not for everybody is that you have to commit to 27 months, and you either don't get paid or you'll get paid a very small amount just to, barely get you to be able to buy food. But she said it was a great experience, and once you complete your service, you usually get a lot of opportunities from then on, so could be worth looking into. Question number 3, are there any other jobs to do abroad besides teaching? 5 jobs that I'm going to talk about are more for the backpacker traveler type. You're not going to save too much money, but it'll be an awesome experience. The first one is an au pair. So this is a live-in nanny. It's really good for people who are traveling by themselves, not so good for someone who's trying to travel as a couple. Because of course you have to live with the family, and they only usually want one person. The second one is working in a hostel. So this is something that's going to be kind of hard to find when you're abroad, but if you're bold enough to just fly to a country that you know you want to live in, I'm sure you'll be able to find a job in a hostel once you arrive. The third one is working on a farm. This depends on the country, of course, because not all countries have farm work, but it is really popular in places like Australia. The fourth one is working on a cruise ship. That one's pretty self-explanatory. You can do any job that you normally would on a cruise ship if you're able to get hired by one. And the last one is to be a tour guide. Usually tour guides who can speak English are highly sought after, so it's again another job that you can look into. If you're looking for something to make a little bit more money or kind of build up your resume a little bit, anything to do with, working from your computer is really great. Engineering, coding, building websites, all of that kind of stuff. I see jobs posted daily, hundreds, wherever I'm looking for in the world. They're always looking for people to do that. And the last way is a little bit harder, but definitely doable. If you're able to find a Western company that has branches in bigger cities around the world, you can apply to those. You can usually do typical marketing, sales, customer service, any office job that you would do back home. As long as it's, again, in a big city where you're not going to be required to learn the local language or know the local language, you should be good. Question number 4, the visa and document process. Ooh, all right, so I'm going to try to give you the simplest version of this. Again, each country is going to be a little bit different in what they require. So I'm going to just talk about the basic things that probably every country is going to require you to do, and then just know that you need to double check with your company, and there might be some additional things that you need to do on top of this. So the first thing you have to do is legalize and authenticate your bachelor's degree. I'm going to explain the process specifically for US and more specifically California, but I know it's pretty much the same for every state. So basically you have to take your original bachelor's degree to the place where they notarize things. They will make a colored copy of your degree right then and there. Then they will notarize the copy of it and say that this is a true copy of your original bachelor's degree. So the next thing you have to do is take your notarized copy of your bachelor's degree to the Secretary of State. If you are lucky enough to live close enough to your Secretary of State, you can take it in on your own. Otherwise, it's going to take a little bit longer because you're going to have to mail it in. But basically, you pay $25 to get an apostille red stamp on your documents with a little paper saying the Secretary of State approves that this is a real bachelor's degree, blah, 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 blah. Then once you have that, you have to take that copy of your bachelor's degree that has the notary and now has the apostille from the California Secretary of State. Now you have to take that to whatever embassy you're going to be moving to. So if you're moving to China, take it to the Chinese embassy, Vietnamese, whatever it may be. Then usually that will take about 5 days for them to legalize it. So that basically means that they're just looking over your documents. If they approve them, they'll give you a little sticker that says these have been legalized by our country. The next document you're going to need is a police background check. Depending on the country that you go to, it's going to depend on what type of police background check you need. For example, in China, I just needed one from my local police department, whereas for Vietnam, I needed a full FBI background check to look for felonies. Either way, usually it's pretty simple. You can go into the police department or you can fill it out online for the FBI check. Usually you just take your fingerprints or you give them your ID, social security number, something like that, and they'll just run the background check for you and give you the paper back in a couple days letting you know your background is clear. And again, depending on the country, you might have to do the same process that you did with your bachelor's degree for this document as well. The notarizing, taking it to the Secretary of State for the apostille, and then getting it legalized by the embassy of wherever you're going to move. Just double check with your company and see if that's required or if it's fine to just have the document from our government or from our police department. And another thing that you're going to need is a health check. So the actual form that you're going to have to fill out is going to be different depending on each country and each company, but it's super basic. Anything that you would normally do for just a basic health checkup, blood test, urine sample. Some require full-on x-rays and a little bit deeper than that, but hopefully your local physician can just do that for you and sign the paper. And now with the coronavirus situation, you're definitely going to have to get a COVID test. Usually it's within 3 days of flying, but just double check what the time limit is and what test you actually need to get. I know for us, we needed to take the PCR test, which I think is pretty standard for traveling, but just double check so you do the right test and the right time. Question number 5, other things to prepare for before moving. First and foremost, again, because of the coronavirus situation, you need to double check what is going to be expected of you upon arrival. Are you going to need a quarantine? Are you going to need to pay for a second COVID test? just things like that, so you can prepare however much money you're going to need to do for the quarantine or self-isolation or the test. Next, double check the weather patterns for the entire year of wherever you're moving, just so you can be prepared for whatever you're packing for. If you know that it's a place like Vietnam that never gets cold, probably not in your best interest to pack coats or a bunch of jackets. So do some research, make sure you know, so that way you can make packing a little bit easier for yourself. Next, I always recommend getting at least a little bit of the foreign currency of wherever you're going from your local bank. Doesn't have to be a lot. I usually probably bring like $200 with me, just in case, because right when you get to the airport, you know, those exchange rates are crazy high and you don't want to just have no cash when you arrive. Thing to think about too, this is what I did when I was at the bank getting my money. I also added my mom onto my account, so she was able to do things for me while I'm not there. So if I get any checks in the mail, she can go deposit them for me. If I need her to send me a wire transfer from abroad, she can do that by having access to my bank account. So if you do have someone that you trust that much, a family member or a friend, I do think that's really important, because you never know. Sometimes things go wrong while you're abroad and you're not really able to help solve them. So having someone who's there and local really helps. Also, I highly recommend that you get a credit card with no international fees, just because you never know when you're going to need it for an emergency. It's always nice to have. Number 6, what do you do first to get set up in your new country? The absolute first thing that I always do is get set up with a new phone plan. Don't do this at the airport, wait until you get into the city center, but go into any phone shop that you see, set up a data plan, so that way obviously you can start using your phone right away. Next, you want to set up a bank account. You might need the help of your new company or school to do this, but typically you just need your passport and your work contract. Even if you don't actually have the work permit stamped into your passport yet, as long as they know you're here legally because you're working, that's fine, and they'll open up a bank account for you. And now it's time to start looking for an apartment, which leads me into question number 7. How do you find an apartment? To find my apartment in Prague and here in Ho Chi Minh City, I just joined Facebook groups. There are tons of Facebook groups that say apartments for rent in whatever city it is, housing in whatever city, but basically realtors are just in there constantly posting different pictures of apartments. If you like any of them, you can comment on the post, you can message them directly, and then you can go view the apartment with them. But in China, since Facebook and all those social media sites are blocked, obviously I couldn't do that, so I just had to wait until I got there, and then my company set me up with a real estate agent. I went around and looked at apartments with her. So I'd say Facebook groups are definitely the place where you should look at first. If you aren't able to find anything, just wait until you arrive. Hopefully your company will either set you up with a real estate agent, or they can at least guide you in the right direction of how you can start looking. Once you find the apartment that you like, keep in mind you're gonna have to pay a deposit and first month's rent right up front. That's the typical norm. In China, I actually had to pay a deposit and then 3 months rent up front, because they pay rent every 3 months, so it's a quarterly rent system. So that was a huge chunk of money right in the beginning. So again, these are questions that you can ask your company. How much money should I be prepared to bring to pay for all of these little things to get you set up? Number 8, how do you meet new people? So the easiest way is definitely gonna be wherever you work, especially if you're an English teacher or you're working at a hostel or something like that. You're gonna be surrounded by foreigners and expats everywhere you go. So it'll be really easy to make friends with, people from your home country or other foreigners who are doing the exact same thing as you. And on top of that, if you like to go out, to the bars, to the clubs, that's where a lot of foreigners and expats hang out also. So just on nights out, you'll meet lots of different people, even if they don't work at your company or your school. And I'm going to talk about Facebook groups again because they're so helpful. So just look up on Facebook, expats in whatever city you're going to move to. In Ho Chi Minh, we even have a Fexpats group, which is female expats in Ho Chi Minh City. It's really awesome. People are always asking questions in there, so you can have conversations, find certain things that you're looking for from back home. Hey, there's a poetry reading. Hey, there's this great sale at this store or a new restaurant opening up. Who wants to go together? So people are just always posting in there. If you want to make friends, there's a huge group of expats out here, and we're all looking for the same thing. We just want, to enjoy this experience with as many people as we can. So it's a great place to find friends. Number 9, how did I personally find my teaching jobs abroad? So for China and Vietnam, I actually found it on Dave's ESL Cafe, which is one of the job boards that I recommended. For Prague, I actually just found it on Indeed, which I think is a little bit weird because typically you don't find teaching jobs abroad on there, but it worked out. For all three of those, I just applied to the company and the school directly instead of going through a recruiting agency. But if you can find a recruiting company or a recruiter, those can be super helpful. Before I moved to Vietnam, I was actually supposed to move to South Korea. I was working with a recruiting company called Footprints Recruiting, and basically I applied to be in their recruiting database. So they interviewed me, I sent them my CV, and once they thought that I was a good enough teacher, I was in their database, and they basically were looking for jobs around the world for me. So they found me a really awesome job in South Korea. I was able to interview with them. It just didn't work out because of the whole coronavirus situation, but they were super helpful, and basically they were doing all the work for me. I just had to sit back and wait for them to notify me of a new job. Number 10, what are the differences between teaching abroad and teaching in the US? I'd say the main one is pretty obvious. You know, back home it's English language arts, so they already know the language. You're really just focusing more on reading comprehension, poetry, styles of writing, different things that are obviously a little bit more in depth. Whereas here, when you're teaching abroad, it's English language, so you're teaching, you know, basic vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, because sometimes in their language they don't say certain things, like, for example, the TH sound. In America, we would know, but here maybe it's really hard for them to say because in their language they don't make a sound. So really focusing on phonics and basic things like that. Now a specific difference on the US versus China. In the US, I feel like if you give your students a very vague task and just try to let them be creative, they'll take it and run with it because they really like doing creative things. Whereas in China, I felt like I had to be really specific with my instructions, and they didn't really like being creative too much. They really liked to be told exactly what to do and how to do it. I found that was a really big cultural difference because I could give my class back in the States a blank piece of paper and say, draw me anything, and they will, and I'll get a bunch of different papers. But if you do that in China, most of the papers will be returned back to you blank because they're going to say that they didn't know exactly what to draw and they didn't want to do it wrong. And a huge difference that I noticed from the US to here in Vietnam is the volume in the classroom. I'd say for the most part back in the US, kids are pretty quiet, especially if you're talking and lecturing, they'll be listening. Of course, they'll talk sometimes, and if you ask them to be quiet, I would say again, for the most part, it's like little murmurs, not actual screams. Whereas in Vietnam, sometimes I can't even hear myself talking because the school is so loud right outside, the windows don't close or the doors don't close. Inside the class, they're shouting at each other. I have to use a microphone just for them to be able to hear me. So sometimes I leave with a really big headache just because the volume in the class is something I've never experienced. It's so loud. I really don't know how they learn in that environment. It's crazy. Number 11, challenges that I faced while living abroad. I'm going to talk about the challenges in each specific country I've lived in just because I think that makes it a little bit easier. Studying abroad in Barcelona, that was my first time really being abroad, definitely living abroad and like being on my own. I didn't really know what to expect, and I was kind of not really ready for everything that was about to happen. In the first week of getting there, I went to go buy groceries, and the clerk said that the receipt machine wasn't working, so is it okay if I just don't get a receipt? I didn't think anything unusual, so I said yeah. Later I found out he charged me like $300 for my groceries, so that was awesome. Then a couple days later, I paid 120 euros for a 3-month Metro pass, and then I lost it. And then on top of all of that, you know, the Spanish culture is just very laid back. They're not very, you know, on time or following schedules, following rules. So the whole thing, it was just a really hard adjustment for me at first. Again, because it was my first time experiencing a new culture, I didn't know what to expect, and I was kind of just thrown in the deep water on my own. Then in China, I moved to a city called Chongqing, which most people have never heard of. It is the 4th largest city in China, but it's still really behind in regards to being able to speak English. It was super hard to try to get by and do basic things when nobody could speak the language. And one of the first days that I was in China, I got extremely sick. I'm not sure if it was food poisoning or what, but it was just a rough welcome to China. And moving on to Prague. Prague was just a lot more expensive than I was expecting, so the money that I had saved and prepared for it definitely wasn't enough. So the first 2 months I was just completely struggling, and I was, you know, really down about that because I wanted to experience this European life, but I couldn't afford to do anything. And then coronavirus hit, so school shut down. My boyfriend and I were quarantining in our apartment, and we didn't even get to see Prague or Europe at all anyways. So Prague I'm not even sure how much I really count it as living abroad because I feel like I didn't really get to experience it, but it was a huge challenge. Having to quarantine and go through this pandemic that's never happened before, all the way across the globe for my family and friends, it was quite scary. And now in Vietnam, I really do have to say I haven't really found anything too challenging living here. I do feel like it's a perfect combination of lots of comforts from the Western world and things back home, with still a little bit of, something new, something exciting. I feel like I'm in a different country. Only been small challenges that I've had to overcome here. One example is when I first opened up my bank account, they wouldn't give me an ATM bank card, but I was able to solve that and just open up an account with another bank, and now I have one, so it's fine. But really, overall, everybody speaks English here. I have access to any type of cuisine I want, any type of things from back home, American foods, American brands, so it really does feel like I have the best of both worlds, a little bit new and a little bit of stuff from home. And the last question, number 12, what is my favorite place that I've lived and why? So I'm gonna take out Barcelona and Prague from this one just because when you're studying abroad, it doesn't really count. You kind of just feel like you're on vacation for a couple months. And again, Prague, I was in quarantine a lot of the time dealing with the coronavirus thing, so it doesn't really count. Comparing China and Vietnam as to what's my favorite place I've lived, I'd say in China, I liked my job a lot more. I don't know why, just my job was super fun. I had really great coworkers who turned into some of my best friends still today. I like the lifestyle a lot more in Vietnam. Again, just what I already said, it just kind of feels like it's the perfect combination of like everything that I have from home, all my comforts, all the foods, all the brands, but still exciting, still new, very laid back. Everybody speaks English and the people are so kind, so welcoming. So I don't know, I couldn't really tell you that I loved one better than the other because they both have pros and cons, but I highly recommend living in either. They're both amazing. So there you have it. That's 12 questions about living and teaching abroad. I started off with before you move, when you actually move, and personal questions about me. Really hope that you found this video helpful if you're thinking about moving or teaching abroad. If you have any other questions, I would love to make a part 2 to this video. Comment down below any questions that you have. Even if you might think it's silly or weird, I guarantee someone else has the same question too. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.